Before I begin, hit that subscribe button if you love hearing real revenge stories. Because trust me, this one is personal. My dad passed away on December 1st, 2022. That date is burned into my memory like a scar I'll carry forever. He was more than my father. He was my anchor. A kind, stubborn man who worked hard his whole life and asked for very little in return. But in the years leading up to his death, he suffered. Not only from his illness, but from the person who should have loved him the most. My mother. To understand why what I did later mattered so much, you need to know what kind of woman she was. My mother wasn't your stereotypical loving, self-sacrificing parent. She was selfish, manipulative, and cold. Some people might say she was a narcissist, but honestly, even that feels like too light a word for the way she treated him. And me. When my dad's health began to fail, it was like she saw his weakness as an opportunity, not a tragedy. His declining mobility, his reliance on her, the financial control she gained, she treated it all like some twisted advantage. And she milked it for everything it was worth. For years she pretended she was separated from him, even divorced, while living under the same roof. She told anyone who'd listen about the men she was talking to online, sometimes bragging she was planning to move away and marry someone else. Imagine that. Your husband, sick and unable to walk long distances, stuck in the house he worked decades to pay for, while you shop around for replacements. And the worst part? She said these things in front of him, sometimes to his face. Financially, she bled him dry. Whenever he got a little extra money, tax refunds, disability checks, anything, she found a way to make it hers. She cloaked her greed under excuses, bills, groceries, necessities. But what she really wanted were her luxuries, her little escapes, her endless online fantasies with men who didn't know who she really was. I tried. God, did I try. For years, I tried to get my dad to move in with me. Dad, I'd say, you don't have to live like this. Come stay with me. You'll be taken care of. You'll be safe. But he wouldn't leave. He was stubborn and his home meant everything to him. It was the house he built his life in. The house he worked endless hours to pay for. Walking away would have felt like giving up. So he stayed, and she continued to neglect and exploit him. We tried legal avenues, durable power of attorney, police reports, even talking to lawyers. But every attempt hit a dead end. It's a civil matter, they'd say. There's nothing we can do. I can't tell you how many times I left those offices burning with rage and helplessness. She was destroying him, and I couldn't stop it. When hospice finally entered the picture, I knew I had to make a decision. So the day after Thanksgiving, I brought my dad into my home. I wanted to give him what she never did: comfort, love, and dignity. I made sure his final days were the best they could be. We watched his favorite shows, played his favorite music, shared quiet conversations, and filled the house with the warmth he had been denied for so long. And when he finally passed, it was in peace. Not in that house of misery, not under her roof, but in mine. I thought the hardest part was over, that now, all I had to do was honor his wishes and carry out the plans we'd discussed. But then came the funeral arrangements. I sat across from the funeral director, explaining my dad's wishes for cremation, when he paused and said, "We'll need your mother's consent for that." My stomach dropped. Of course. Of course, even now, she had to have control. She had tormented him in life, and now she was holding his body hostage in death. When I approached her with the request, her answer was exactly what I expected. No. I felt a heat rising in my chest I can't describe. I had cared for him in his last breath. I had made his peace possible. And she, the woman who neglected and abused him, was denying his final wish out of pure spite. It wasn't until I allowed her to keep the survivor benefits, the Social Security money she was going to get anyway, that she finally relented. Imagine that. Bargaining over ashes, over dignity, over my father's last request. That was the moment something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story. I wasn't going to let her stand in front of people, crocodile tears streaming down her face, pretending to be the grieving widow. She had forfeited that right years ago. When it came time to write the obituary, I made a decision. I left her out. Every word was about my dad. His childhood, his work, his hobbies, his stubborn humor, his resilience, his story. There was no mention of a wife, no acknowledgement of her existence. She had spent years erasing him with her cruelty. Now it was her turn to be erased. And when the obituary went public, the fallout began. When the obituary went online, I knew people would notice. In small towns and tight-knit families, people always notice. The first call came from a family friend. She said, "Hey, I read the obituary, but wasn't your mom married to your dad all these years?" I could almost hear the confusion in her voice. And here's the thing, I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't lie. I didn't try to play the polite game that my mother had mastered for decades. I just said, she doesn't deserve to be in it. She wasn't a wife to him, not in any real sense. She neglected him, exploited him, and made his life harder until the day he died. There was silence on the other end of the phone, a long silence. Then finally, "Oh, but that 'oh' said everything." More calls came. Cousins, old neighbors, extended family members. Why wasn't she in the obituary? What happened? And each time I told the truth. Not with venom, not with theatrics, just the plain, simple truth. She didn't earn that place in his story. She wasn't the grieving widow she wanted the world to see. She was the reason his life was harder than it needed to be. And slowly, the truth began to spread. My mother had spent years building a reputation. To outsiders, she was the long-suffering wife with a sick husband, the woman who had to do it all. She told stories about how hard it was to care for him, how much she sacrificed. She played the victim to perfection, but now, that mask started to crack. People who once pitied her began to ask harder questions. They remembered things. How often she was online chatting with other men, how many times she bragged about being done with him, how she never looked tired or worn out from caring for him. Because the truth was, she barely cared for him at all. And once one person starts questioning the narrative, it spreads like wildfire. I'd run into people at the grocery store who'd whisper, "I saw the obituary. No mention of your mom." Or, "I always wondered about her, honestly. She never seemed, like a real caregiver." Behind those words was something sweeter than I expected. Validation. For years, I had lived in the gaslit fog of her manipulation, wondering if anyone else saw what I saw. And now, piece by piece, the fog lifted. But for her, it was a storm. She called me once, raging. "How could you do this to me? Do you know how humiliating it is to have people calling me, asking questions?" I stayed calm. "If you didn't want the truth out, maybe you should have treated him better." She screamed, called me ungrateful, cruel, vindictive. But the power behind her words was gone. I didn't need to scream back. I didn't need to justify myself. I had already won. Because here's the thing about reputations built on lies. They only stand as long as people believe in them. And once you shine a little light, once the truth gets even a crack of daylight, the whole thing starts to collapse. In the weeks after the obituary, I started noticing little changes. Friends who used to flock to her side stopped visiting. Family who once took her stories at face value kept their distance. Even the ones who didn't say it out loud had that look. The look of people who finally realized they'd been played. And she hated it. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the center of sympathy. She wasn't the victim. She wasn't the heroine of her own story. She was exposed. And she had no one to blame but herself. I'll admit something here. I didn't just let it happen. When people asked questions, I made sure to give them enough of the truth to break her image, but not so much that it looked like I was out for blood. I wanted it to look effortless, natural, like the truth was finally bubbling up after years of being hidden. And in a way, it was. Some nights, I'd sit back and think about my dad. About how he endured years of her cruelty, how he kept his dignity even when she tried to strip it away. And I thought, this is for you, Dad. This is my gift back to you. She can't rewrite your story anymore. She can't paint herself as the loyal wife while erasing your suffering. You get to be remembered for who you were. And she gets remembered for who she really is. One day I ran into one of her longtime friends at the gas station. This woman had known my mom for decades, one of her biggest defenders. She pulled me aside and said, "I didn't know. I didn't realize how bad it was for your dad. I thought your mom—" She trailed off, shaking her head. Well, I guess I was wrong. That was the moment I knew the revenge was complete. Not because people hated her now. Not because she was embarrassed or humiliated, but because people finally saw her clearly. Her lies were gone, her mask was gone, and there was no rebuilding from this. And as for me, I felt lighter. For years I carried the weight of her abuse, her manipulation, her constant twisting of reality. But now the truth was out there, and truth, once it's spoken, doesn't go back in the box. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The weeks after my dad's passing were a blur of grief, paperwork, and small quiet moments where I tried to breathe again. But beneath all of it, something bigger was unfolding. My mother was unraveling. You see, for years she had cultivated this identity, the poor, suffering wife, the woman who sacrificed everything for her sick husband. She would sigh in public, put her hand to her forehead, and talk about how exhausted she was. She would paint herself as a warrior in a battle no one else could understand. And people, neighbors, co-workers, even family, ate it up. But now, that story was dead. Her calls became more frequent, more desperate. At first she raged, accusing me of betrayal, of humiliating her. But when rage didn't work, she tried pity. Do you know how hard this is for me? Everyone's whispering. Everyone's looking at me different. I just lost my husband, and now I've lost my reputation too. I almost laughed. Lost your husband? You never had him. Lost your reputation? You destroyed it yourself. But I didn't say those things. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. She started posting vague messages on Facebook, fishing for sympathy. Some people just want to ruin others when they're already grieving, she wrote. Or, it's sad when your own children don't respect you. The comments section wasn't what she expected. Instead of a flood of support, people asked questions, real, pointed questions. What do you mean? Why wasn't your name in the obituary? Is it true what people are saying? And just like that, her attempts to rebuild the mask turned into fresh cracks. At family gatherings, she tried to steer conversations back to her victimhood. But it didn't land anymore. People looked at her differently now, with skepticism, with discomfort, some even with quiet disgust. One cousin pulled me aside after a holiday dinner and said, "I always thought something was off with her. She never acted like she cared about your dad. Honestly, I think you did the right thing." Those little affirmations were like fuel. For years, I had been the one gaslit, manipulated, made to feel crazy. But now, the tide had turned, and what made it even sweeter was this. I didn't have to scream, or fight, or launch some dramatic campaign to destroy her. All I did was tell the truth and let people see it for themselves. Meanwhile, she kept spiraling. She called my siblings, begging them to defend her. She reached out to old friends, trying to spin the story back in her favor. But the more she talked, the more obvious her lies became. I remember one particular conversation that sealed it for me. She showed up unannounced at my house one afternoon, clearly frazzled. "You don't understand what you've done," she said. "People don't look at me the same anymore. I can't go to the store without feeling judged. They whisper, they stare." I let her rant for a while before I finally said, calmly, "If you didn't want people to talk about it, you shouldn't have done it." She froze. And in that silence, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not of me, but of herself. She realized in that moment that the life she'd built on manipulation was gone. And there was nothing she could do to get it back. That was when I understood something important. Revenge doesn't always have to be loud or messy. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is quiet, simple, just the truth, laid bare for the world to see. My dad deserved better. And through me, he finally got it. He was remembered as the man he truly was. Strong, stubborn, hardworking, loving. Not as the burden she made him out to be. And she was remembered as what she was too. Selfish, neglectful, cruel. Over time, the calls stopped. The angry messages dried up. She retreated into her own bitterness, isolated, her little web of lies finally broken. And me? I felt something I hadn't felt in years. freedom. For so long, I thought speaking the truth would only bring more chaos, more fights, more drama. But the opposite happened. By telling the truth, calmly and consistently, I took away her power. I cut the strings she used to pull. I still go to therapy, still unpack the years of maternal narcissistic abuse, but now I do it without the weight of secrecy, without the shame she tried to put on me. And every time I share the story, every time I say out loud what happened, I feel lighter. So here's the advice I want to leave you with. Never underestimate the power of truth. If someone has spent years manipulating you, abusing you, or rewriting history, you don't owe them silence. Silence protects them, not you. The moment you shine a light on what they've done, their power starts to fade. And if they didn't want the truth exposed, they should have lived better. My father deserved peace. Now he has it. And my mother? She's left with the wreckage of her own lies. And I'll say this without hesitation. If I had the chance to do it all over again, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't move in a straight line. It loops. It doubles back. It catches you off guard. One minute you think you're okay, and the next you're staring at an empty chair, realizing you'll never hear that voice again. Losing my dad left a hole. No amount of revenge, no amount of validation could ever fill that. But what I did, the way I chose to handle his obituary, the way I told the truth about my mother, gave me something almost as important as closure. It gave me clarity. For years, my life had been fogged by her lies. Therapy helped, yes, but there was always this nagging fear in the back of my head. What if nobody believes me? That's the trap of living with a narcissist. They twist reality so effectively that even you start to question your own memory. You replay events in your head 1,000 times, wondering if maybe you misunderstood, maybe you exaggerated, maybe you're the problem. But once the obituary went out, once the questions started, once I spoke the truth plainly and consistently, that fog lifted. People believed me, not because I shouted the loudest, but because the story finally made sense. All those little things they noticed over the years but brushed off suddenly fit together, and for me, that was a kind of healing. Therapy became different after that. Instead of trying to convince myself that my experiences were valid, I could finally accept them as fact. I could look my therapist in the eye and say, yes, she was abusive. Yes, she manipulated. Yes, she neglected him. And I could say it without hesitation, because it was no longer just my truth. It was the truth. Sometimes revenge is painted as ugly, petty, cruel, but in this case, revenge was a form of justice. It wasn't about screaming or destroying or burning everything down. It was about restoring balance, about giving my dad the dignity he deserved, and taking back the narrative from someone who had stolen it for years. Do I feel sorry for my mother? Not really. She lost friends. She lost sympathy. She lost the carefully constructed image she'd spent years building. But she didn't lose it because of me. She lost it because of her own actions. I was just the mirror, holding up a reflection she couldn't control anymore. And maybe that's the part that stings the most for her. For years, she held the pen, writing the story however she wanted. But when the final chapter came, I took that pen away. I wrote it the way it deserved to be written. And no matter what she says, no matter how she spins it, she can't erase that. There are still moments when the grief sneaks up on me. I'll be driving and suddenly hear one of his favorite songs. Or I'll be cooking something and remember how he used to joke about my kitchen disasters. Those moments hurt. But they also remind me of the man he really was. Not the distorted version my mother painted, but the real man. And I know this much. He would be proud. Proud that I stood up. Proud that I refused to let her take his dignity even in death. Proud that I chose truth over silence. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Abuse thrives in silence. Lies thrive in silence. But the moment you speak the truth, their power crumbles. I know it's terrifying. I know it feels like you'll be the one judged. The one who looks crazy. The one who gets shunned. But I promise you, when you speak honestly, people notice. Even if it's just one person. Even if it's just yourself. And once that truth is out there, you'll never have to carry it alone again. My dad is gone. My mother is exposed. And me, I'm still here. Still healing. Still learning. But lighter. Freer. Stronger. And if I had to make the same decision again, to leave her name out, to shatter her carefully built facade, to watch her crumble under the weight of her own lies. Yes. 1,000 times yes, because in the end, revenge wasn't about punishing her. It was about honoring him, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat.